Hi there. This is Kim Thompson, and I'm with Spirit Primer, where I try to make sense of life in this new dimension. And today I'm with my friend Peter Rogen of Your DNA Awakening. And you may have seen my interview with Peter before, where we talked about actual DNA awakening, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm actually enrolled in his second series called The Future Is Now Codes, right? The Future Is Now?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I'm really enjoying it. I think this is the third of the series, and it's just fascinating. So if you ever have a chance to take one of Peter's classes, I highly recommend it. But for now, let's welcome Peter Rogen of Your DNA Awakening. Peter, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Kim. How are you?
Good. I hear you just got back from a music festival.
I did just get back from a music festival, the Northwest String Summit, actually, which is a big bluegrass festival, kind of right outside of Portland that I've just been going to for years with my friends, and it's a pretty special, sacred space for a lot of us to go engage with.
Cool. And we're going to talk about how music fits into all of this in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about this, The Future Is Now codes. Bring us up to date. I know what was the name of the first course? Tell me that.
The first course was just called the Your DNA Awakening e-course, and it was, the idea that I've done a lot of work one-on-one, and that we can start to sort of move into more easy formats where I'm not sort of bottlenecking up every little energy exchange that somebody wants with me, and that we can be facilitating, energy exchanges through e-courses now, where there's, modules and videos that, hold a lot of information and then also hold a lot of energy exchanges within them. So you'll actually receive clearings and activations through engagement with these e-courses.
So tell us if you can in sort of a snippet about The Future Is Now codes. Where is that taking us?
Sure. So the Future Is Now codes get a little bit odd in terms of where they come from, and that, when I talk about, a DNA activation, what it is that I have really high direct access to my higher self in very sort of concrete ways that I can be facilitating bringing some of my higher self's energy in a very substantial way onto Earth and into people's bodies. And so, I pull in what I would call light codes for my higher self, which is the idea that, I can pull in encoded sound frequency, light frequencies into people's bodies from my higher self. And then there's, different things that I'm trying to accomplish with each of those codes. And that, with those Future Is Now codes, those are, as far as I know, some of the highest frequency, most completely harmonic frequencies on the planet right now. And the idea that, when you bring completely harmonic frequencies into somebody's body, it's actually can be somewhat of a difficult transition, because most people's lives are not existing in these completely harmonic realms yet. And so when you bring these frequencies into somebody and then they're asked to sort of incorporate them, that means that their whole lives going to have to start to get more harmonic and in touch with their own higher self and mission. And so, there's a reason we put people through a lot of clearings and some activations before I would let anyone even touch those codes. Because, if you bring those codes into somebody that aren't ready, it's going to create a lot of tumultuous stuff in their life. And almost like, soda's fizzing out, but you have the cap on too tight still, and it's just not going to work, right? Well, if you kind of get the cap loosened up through a lot of some clearings and some other activations, then it starts to just bust over, right? And there's no restriction there. And I know, personally and through a lot of clients and friends and family, it can be a pretty intense thing to start to incorporate these kinds of frequencies into your life and your body. And, in terms of the reason I'm calling them the Future Is Now is because they sort of come from future timelines of my Ascended Master presence. And that may sound like a really bizarre thing for a lot of people, myself included. And, maybe the best analogy that many people kind of within this world and who are awakening a little bit at this point is somebody like Bashar, right, who's this channel, right? And he always talks about he's just channeling in a future incarnation of his higher self.
Okay.
So, it's not some other entity.
Okay.
He's actually channeling in his higher self, but his higher self sort of connected to a future incarnation that's very aware and knows what's going on in our future timelines.
Okay.
And so he's able to pull this really important information in that sort of comes from the future. And in somewhat of a similar way, I'm pulling in sort of codes from my future timelines. And so the whole point was kind of like creating the most harmonic codes I could ever create don't come from me right now living in Portland, Oregon, because I still am a little bit of a 3D being that has all these 3D distortions still. For however high frequency I am and cleared out I am, I'm still a 3D being here, and that starting to pull in some codes from some parts of myself that aren't so distorted by this life on Earth is kind of the idea behind some of those codes.
So it's so mind-boggling in some
it's
ways.
hard.
But I want to understand. So, you were sort of called to do this. I mean, I know you've trained and you've talked about the people you've trained with, and but so these future is now codes. Was that just sort of during a meditation you were like, oh, I'm getting the message that I need to do these higher codes?
No, I sort of stumbled upon them actually, and I guess if I'm going to really talk about where they came from, I would have to go back to some of my training in the 3D, which came from two living masters. One was Steve Fulop of Kundalini Awakening and DNA Activation. He's a young guy in New York City. I think he's 29 years old or something. Wow. The other guy is Toby Alexander, who I think is in his 40s and has been doing DNA work since the early 2000s, and is the guy who's been doing this the longest. And his wife, actually, Yvonne Delafleur. She, during an intense meditation, was basically given access to what she was calling the absolute harmonic universe. So the idea that, we could talk about this universe has sort of different levels that contain our higher selves, our 3D bodies, our soul identities, our oversoul identities, our avatar selves, are all sort of housed within these universal frequencies. Yvonne was sort of given access to what she was calling the higher self universe of this universe.
Okay.
Which she was talking about again as the absolute harmonic universe, which is completely untouched by distortion.
Wow.
And so what she did is she pulled in what she was calling golden DNA activations. And so she kind of pulled them in, and then Toby, being the big facilitator he's been spreading those for the last 10 years or so. I think it was 2006 or so. 7 years or so. And what happened is I accessed those codes. And so I got myself tuned up to the absolute harmonic universe, to where I then now had access to these completely undistorted frequencies. And one day, sort of in a meditation, I was kind of thinking, because it's really odd that this work sort of exists outside of time and space, and that I work on people all over the world, right? Space is not a limiting factor in my life at all anymore. I have clients in Korea and Germany and England, right? And it really starts to shift your understanding of this world when I can just work on somebody in China.
Right.
And so, the idea that I'm facilitating work through higher self and through the other person's higher self. So I'm working with parts of myself and the other person that again exist outside of time and space. And so I've always kind of used that to my advantage, and I can work on people in different times and all this stuff, and it works out now. So I was kind of thinking, well, if I have access to this part of me that exists outside of time and space, why can't I just pull in the highest frequency codes that I will ever use in the future? And so it was almost like a mental thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
More than I kind of deeply tuned in and was given this information, I was kind of like, well, why can't I just do that?
Right.
And so
light bulb.
light bulb. And so normally what I do is I'll kind of figure out, let's say I'm gonna do some activations for worthiness and deservedness, right? And so I'll kind of tune in, connect them out. Am I gonna pull in one code about that? No. Am I gonna pull in two?
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So there's gonna be two codes about worthiness and deservedness that I'm gonna pull in right now. And when I started asking about, I expected just a couple codes, and I was like, oh, am I supposed to pull in just one of those? No, two. It kept going up, and I was like, oh, am I supposed to do a full 12-strand DNA activation with this? Is this supposed to be my, next big thing? And they were like, yes, absolutely, get working on that. And so, it wasn't too planned in the beginning. It kind of just, happened and then rolled along, and then I started to figure out what they were wanting me to use these codes for, because sometimes I'll pull in codes that are just kind of like, oh, and then, those are nice, and, some people, my clients will access them, but they're not going to be sort of big e-course
Okay.
codes that I'm going to be using. And, these just kind of slowly kept coming out as like, no, use those, use those, use those, as your, highest frequency full 12 strand activation.
Okay. So, Mike, the question that comes to my mind is why you or why Stephen Fulop or Toby Alexander or who how does it happen that certain people get to receive these these guidances to pull in these codes?
Sure. Well, that's kind of a tricky one. And I would say it gets into a little bit what I talked about in the last Future is Now class about volunteer souls.
Okay.
And that this Earth is going through this ascension cycle. This Earth is raising in frequency. Things are shifting in all sorts of directions for people. And this is not the first time Earth has gone through this high frequency stage of itself, right? It happens about every 26,000 years. If you go, billions of years of histories of Earth, that's obviously happened many, many times. This is not some big new thing like, whoa, this is just like another click on a wheel that's happening over and over and over and over and over. It just happens to be that we're at a time where there was so much darkness and density on Earth that it sort of wasn't going to be able to make this shift successfully. And the whole 2012, right, again, culminates with the end of that ascension cycle, and the idea that there are all these doomsday prophecies because of that, right, and we're all just going to die and drown in the ocean, right, because that was maybe a possible timeline that was in our future. That was like a real thing that, and that, again, when Earth is going through this shift in frequency, everything on it needs to go through that shift in frequency too. And what happens is us humans, we have way too much darkness and density and attachment to move up with it. And so we were kind of like this like fog holding it back.
A drag. We were a drag.
Exactly. And that the point is that they were going to have to sort of shed us, right? Or shed other things to sort of make this successfully. And rather than just letting us kind of roll along, they figured out we needed some help here on Earth. And when I say they,
yeah, that was my next question.
I guess I would,
Who's them?
Yeah. The idea that there's maybe keepers of the Earth. Earth is a very special place. It's a very valued place in the universe. It's a very valued school in duality. A lot of the information that I'm presenting here comes from Dolores Cannon. If anyone's interested in
check out Dolores Cannon.
Check out Dolores Cannon. But that there's kind of keepers of the Earth, and that one of the biggest laws in the universe is free will. It is one of the most important things. And you can imagine, if you're going to set up a universe, and you're going to set up a bunch of dominoes that don't do anything, you're going to set them up, and you're just going to hit them, and they're just going to go. That's pretty entertaining, but that's not that exciting. It's much more exciting if you set up dominoes, you give them all free will, and then that domino can go run over there, and then when you start them off, it hits and changes everything, right? And so free will is a very honored thing at all levels, because without it, the universe sort of loses its magic.
Okay.
Right?
Wow.
And so what happens is they can't just come in here from an outside, right? People talk about, disclosure and stuff, and that, that maybe will be something, that will be happening. But as of right now, the fix isn't that they're going to swoop in and just blast us up and they're going to save everything. The whole point is that we have free will
to do it ourselves.
And so, because they can't sort of swoop in from an outside angle, the call goes out. Earth needs help. Earth isn't going to make this.
Right.
And the whole point of raising the frequency of Earth is you can't add the same frequency beings. You can't add the same temperature water more to a cup and make it hotter.
Right.
It's just the same temperature with more.
Right.
You need to add hotter water or more high frequency beings.
More light.
More light, yes. And so the call basically went out for any volunteer souls.
Okay.
And so these are people and souls and identities who generally would not come to Earth, because Earth is this low-level school in duality where people are learning hard lessons like war and famine, right? Disease. This is not a place you come to have a nice, happy incarnation. You come and you incarnate into parents who are getting divorced, and one's abusive, and your brother's a drug addict, and all these things. And so, again, the call goes out for volunteers to come incarnate here. Do you want to go help Earth? And so there's sort of these different waves of, again, what I would call volunteer souls. Again, souls who are who have sort of mastered and ascended out of these realms before. and we are just back here to help. And it's always a tricky one because, we don't want to create any distinctions or divisions or hierarchy or anything like that, because that's all nonsense.
Right.
And so it's a little bit difficult to know how to sort of talk about a little bit of the story about what's going on without having it be dividing.
Right.
And what I would say is it's just like, imagine if we're going to take a trip across country and we got 10 people we're going to drive across the country with, and say 2 of them have done it before.
Got it.
And 8 of them have not.
Okay.
There's no difference in
We're all
there.
going across
We're
country.
all going across the country. And some of us maybe will be like, oh, we should take this road and this road because we know about some nice thing up there.
Right.
But there's no difference. And then in the end, when we're all going to,
Right.
we're all going
to get there.
Exactly. And then it's no difference if you've done it twice or once. You're all kind of in the same place, and that, really letting people know there's no hierarchy.
Right.
About,
you're not special because
I'm not
you're
special. No.
And I think that we're all, I think especially at this time, at least it's my impression, that we are all here in some form to do something to raise the vibration of the planet. And for me, it happens to be this funny little show called Spirit Primer. But that I have been guided that, as I've searched, and a lot of my clarity came through some of the work that I did with you, that this is what I can do, is to share and disseminate information and interview people that are actually connecting to the source.
Yes.
Because I think that's what all of you people are doing, is actually providing
absolutely.
a connection to source. So let's break away from that, though, and quickly talk about what you're excited about, which is this connection to music. And we talked a little bit about shows. And so tell me how this all works in and what you're excited about.
Well, I guess if I were to talk about my biggest dreams for the future and this work and where this is going, is that, I've always had an incredibly deep connection to music, and my first experiences of higher self have been facilitated through psychotropic drugs, going to concerts, and, really opening myself up and really getting in tune, and, with some really intense stuff going on here. Those first awakenings and openings you're going through. And then many of what I would call my people, right? And we all just naturally have our people here, right?
We gravitate towards each other.
Yes, absolutely. Are all huge music fans. And not just that, they put on CDs, but that they're flying all over the country, and they're driving all over the country, and they're spending weeks and weekends and weeks, at a time going to travel around and see music. Similarly to what I would say the Grateful Dead experience, and then a band called Phish. And I grew up in New England right when I was in high school, was like all around me, and it just became a huge part of my life. And I still have many friends who are huge fans. Actually, I'm leaving tonight to go drive up to the Gorge in Washington to go see them for 2 nights.
Oh, Phish?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
But that, my biggest hope and dream about this work is the idea that, I can facilitate this work for groups of people. And you're obviously aware of that. You're in some of my group classes, and so I'm working on people all over the globe, all at once. It's a pretty bizarre, intense thing to engage in. But, because I can work on groups of people at a time, I have this huge driving instinct to start doing this in a real way with music concerts. And the idea that once we start getting the crowd and the band and everybody all sort of in resonance with what's going on, where instead of people going and eating a bunch of drugs and blasting off into the universe, which is a fine way, and for people that experience is necessary, that's, go experience that. It's something that I've moved way past, and I don't use any drugs at all anymore.
Mom, did you know that? Me neither.
But that the idea that we can, instead of having crowds, again, use drugs, we can be putting up symbols during songs, and we can be doing, an auric clearing on the entire crowd and band during a song, right? And then we could, do a DNA activation in the next set, right?
Nice.
And that, my biggest hope and dream for some of this work is in that realm. And that, I've spent so much of my time engaging in that world and playing in bands for years in New England, and just being, really engaged in music, and that, when this kind of came in, it really pushed everything else out of my life, and I fully stepped into this, in a really big way. It pushed music out of my life, it pushed physics out of my life, right?
This is a way to bring it all together.
Yes, and that in the end, the fact that I threw myself into music and I threw myself into physics in a very concrete way, those are not wasted
Not at all.
times
because
for me.
Apparently it does all get back to math and physics, but also music and the octaves and how the octaves fit into the chakras. And
Yes.
I don't know it enough to speak to it, but
No,
I know just enough to be dangerous.
No, I would say there's absolutely something to that, and the idea that we can, people that go to concerts and sort of open themselves up become these sort of resonant forks, right, to the music that's going on in the universe, right, and they're very open channels at that point. The people who are there, the most open people I've ever worked on are the people that are at music concerts, and they're like letting it all in.
Yeah.
And then just to have a little bit of different energy come in, they're like, cool,
Bring
it right in.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I just have a lot of hopes and dreams about that one.
Excellent. Well, I've seen you, manifest the work that you're doing now. I think I met you fairly early on, and you've really done a good job of putting your work out there as it is now. So I feel like, if this is what you want to do and this is what you're meant to do, you will do it. And I do think that it's fascinating that the music and the physics and now the DNA work, bringing them all together just makes all kinds of sense. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so
Oh my
much,
God, it's
Kim.
so good to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you too.
Yay.
I've known Kim through
months.
the internet
Yeah.
and Skype, and so this is the first time we've met in person.
Yeah, it's all good. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for joining me today on Spirit Primer, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks to my camera person, Corinne Craig.